Hi everyone! I know that today I would usually be posting some kind of food video, but I thought that this week instead I would talk a little bit about intermittent fasting, especially since I had mentioned it in my first video and a couple of you had asked me about it and I never really came back to it. So I thought I would just talk about the basics of how it works and how I incorporate it into my everyday life. So for those of you who don't know, intermittent fasting is basically just giving yourself a window of time during the day in which you eat, and outside of that window there's no eating. So the gist of how it works is like this. Our bodies get energy from burning through two sources, sugar and fat. So sugar is burned first and more quickly, and fat is burned second and more slowly. So before your body can burn any kind of fat, it needs to burn through the sugar. So that basically means that anytime you consume sugar, including refined starches like, wheat and rice, bread, those kinds of things, your body has to first burn through all of that before it can even start to burn any fat. So with fasting intermittently, what you're basically doing is giving your body enough time to burn through all of those sugars so that it can actually start burning the excess fat that you may be carrying. So ideally, intermittent fasting kind of goes hand in hand with minimizing sugar. But even if you didn't even touch your diet and you just incorporated the fasting, you would definitely still benefit from the process. Also, just thinking about this from an evolutionary standpoint, being able to burn our own fat for fuel is how we've been able to survive through times of famine. We're not really meant to be eating 3 times a day and snacking all in between. Fasting has been a part of our development and evolutionary process since like the beginning of time. And if you consider how rare it is to find sugar in nature, probably most of our ancestors were in fat burning mode for most of their lives. So it is actually a more natural way of eating than what we're used to today. Not to mention that it's great for your brain and great for weight loss, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and kind of helps to reawaken sleepy metabolisms, which is what it did for me. I had a very, very slow metabolism, so there's a lot of wonderful reasons to give it a try. So for me, the established eating time that I've kind of settled into is between noon and 6 p.m. So I don't eat outside of that, and the exceptions would be coffee, tea, and water. So I usually have some coffee in the morning, maybe tea at night, and of course water you can probably drink anytime and should be drinking all throughout the day. So those are the exceptions. And another thing that I really love about this process is that you can tailor it to your personal preferences and schedules. So, for me, if I'm really listening to my body, I know that I am not hungry in the morning when I wake up. So it's best for me to have my first meal around lunchtime. But if you're someone who wakes up starving in the morning most days, then you can probably shift your eating time to be earlier in the day. So you can definitely play around with it and see what works best for you. I also believe it's a really nice first step if you're looking to change your eating habits or to lose some weight, because all you're doing is just changing when you're eating and not adjusting for what you're eating. So it's usually a pretty doable thing for anyone to kind of just jump into and start. And if you're someone who eats all throughout the day at any time and you haven't done anything like this before, you can just ease your way into it by starting giving yourself a 12-hour daily fast. So maybe you go from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. eating, and then you can kind of slowly narrow that down until you get to a time frame that works best for your body and your metabolism. So the sweet spot for me is usually eating for 6 hours and then fasting for 18. So that's what has kind of worked best for my body, and it's been really, really beneficial. I've been doing this consistently for about 2 years now, and over that time period, my body slowly but continuously lost weight. And it is definitely a slow process. I think it kind of requires some patience, but it's definitely worth it, and your body does eventually adjust to this kind of new way of eating. So I hit a bunch of plateaus. When I first started, I was around 155 pounds, and then kind of got to 140, stayed there for a bit, got to 133 and hit another plateau, and then 125, and then I was at 120 for a very, very long time up until the last month or so, in which I've hit a new low of 116 pounds, which is crazy to me because that's significantly lower than I've ever been in the past. But it's also been surprisingly easy to maintain. And I think that is because the process is kind of slow and drawn out. But again, I think that's what's so beneficial, because you're more likely to be able to stay kind of at that weight instead of fluctuating so much and possibly gaining where you end up kind of where you began. So it definitely is really, really helpful for that kind of more long-term weight loss if you stick with it consistently. And that time's gonna pass anyway, so it's really okay if this takes, you know, a lot longer than you might be expecting. I think it's a great way to just constantly keep your body in check, and it's easy to incorporate into your everyday life, and you know, you can kind of accommodate for social events you might have that involve eating. So if I know I'm gonna have dinner with friends at 7 p.m., that's later than I would usually be eating, but I would just, you know, shift my time period or my window to be later in the day to, you know, kind of work with that. So it's really not restrictive at all. It's plenty easy to incorporate, and it's really beneficial for your health. It does things like increase longevity and makes cell regeneration more effective. So yeah, it's all good stuff, and I mostly just wanted to share with you all my experience with it because it has been so incredibly helpful for me. And if any of you have experiences with intermittent fasting, I'd love to hear about them, so you can go ahead and comment below. And I've also attached a reading in the description box below if you'd like to know kind of more of the technicalities of how intermittent fasting works and just more about it in general. And please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.